Brother Carl Gallups, it's a pleasure having you on these golden airways, but on Sunday, this past Sunday, was a very, very tragic day here in America. That was when a gunman down in Texas opened fire at a small church outside of San Antonio. That's down in Texas, of course, and he killed 26 people. I want you to talk to us about this situation.
Yeah, well, no, I appreciate it. Listen, I want to remind your audience, and most of them know this, but of course you're always picking up new listeners, that as I speak to them about this, I want to talk about several very important facets of this. First of all, I want to remind your listeners that I spent 10 years in Florida law enforcement with 2 different sheriff's offices as a uniformed patrol officer and even doing my own criminal investigations in one of those offices. So I've come at this from the law enforcement standpoint. I have also been a pastor, a senior pastor of one church for 31 years and was an associate pastor for several years before that in a large church out in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I'm now on the Gulf Coast, as I said, for 31 years as the senior pastor in one church. So now let me address this from all kinds of angles, from the social angle, from the spiritual angle, from the logistical angle, from the protection angle. I'll try to answer a few questions about that people ask about, should Christians carry guns? Should churches have guns and, people with guns in churches, etc. I know, let me just say, this is a different time we are now living in, Brother Carl. I am a very positive person. I'm a very upbeat person. Our church is happy and upbeat. It's powerful. It's spirit-filled. We don't sit around and moan and groan and focus on the negative. But we are smart as well. And one of the reasons we can be so happy is because we do protect ourselves very, very well. And I can give your listeners, perhaps you have pastors listening, perhaps church leaders, church members who are wanting to do something about church security where they are. I can give a lot of good advice today here in just the next few moments, and I can speak to small churches. Yes, even tiny churches can protect themselves, right all the way up to big churches. Some of our bigger churches, believe it or not, have no real security measures in place. So let me just say, it's a new day. It's a different day. We're not living 50 years ago in America. This is not Andy Griffith days and Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver. We're on the other side of 2001, 9/11. We're on the other side of the Las Vegas shooting and all of these church shootings and school shootings and Columbine and on and on and on. This is the new America, sadly. And it's been a long time coming, but it is still coming. Because by and large, we Americans, not maybe your listeners or you and me, Brother Carl, but our society, we've taken for granted our foundation, our history, our Judeo-Christian roots. We've taken for granted our First and Second Amendment rights. We've gone on about our lives just thinking it would always be the same and we would never have to fight for it. We would never have to sacrifice for it. We could just let somebody else do that. Well, in the meantime, the absolute leftist liberals have come into our nation. They've been here since the inception, but the last 50, 60 years, they've worked hard. Maybe the last 100 years, they've worked hard to turn this around to their favor, to this socialistic, communistic, anti-God society. And we're here, and we're getting even deeper into it. Maybe under the Donald Trump presidency, some things will turn around. We'll see. We've got a little freedom to turn it around, but if we don't, I fear it's just going to get worse, Brother Carl. But in the meantime, there's a real demonic, of course, outpouring around the world. We're living on the other side of the return of Israel. We're living in very prophetic days. And it shouldn't surprise us that there would be such vicious attacks on God, God's people, God's word, the churches, Christian worship. It shouldn't surprise us because at the base level, this is a spiritual thing. This is a demonic thing. All right. Now let's talk about it at the human level because this is where we live and this is where the hurt is. Let me just say to our listeners, statistically speaking, this probably won't happen in your church. Okay? Now, I'm saying that it's like winning the lottery, and I don't mean to be flippant about this, but I mean, the chances of lightning striking you as you're just walking down the street today, pretty slim. But it does happen. People do win the lottery, and lightning does strike people, and an active shooter, does go into churches from time to time. And this one was the worst one in U.S. history. It's the worst one. 27 people dead and dozens injured, and I mean half the church basically killed. They only had about 50 active members, I think, if I remember correctly. But the point is, the reason every church needs security systems, and I'll explain how to do that in a moment, is not because we live in fear, but because we have to be smart, Brother Carl, because 90% of crimes that take place in church are not active shooters. That's why I said the chance of somebody just walking in and start shooting at your church are very, very slim. But it does happen in some churches, as we have seen. But here's what does happen a lot in churches. Theft. I mean, pocketbooks are stolen. People, money is stolen. Equipment is stolen. Burglary. People break into churches at night. Sometimes physical, confrontations occur in churches. Sometimes there's some battery that occurs, some assault that occurs. Sometimes, very sadly, there are sexual assaults that occur in churches. These are the kinds of things. Sometimes there are criminal threats made. Angry family members show up at church, and all of these kinds of things. Custody issues over children. Sometimes there's child snatching situations out of the nursery area because an angry spouse or ex-spouse knows where the children are. This is why I tell churches, don't just look at this horrible situation in Sutherland Springs, Texas, and say, oh my gosh, we have to protect against this. Yes, we do. But we just need to protect ourselves, generally speaking, because we are, a church is a conglomeration of people. I don't care if it's 10 or 20 people or 5,000 people. It's a place where people congregate into one wad, one building, one center, one facility, one piece of property. And so if you're not taking some kind of precautions, you can set yourself up as a sitting duck. Now, here's what I tell smaller churches. Any church can have security, okay? And there's several different ways to do this. First of all, any church can have a team of roving, wandering watchers. I don't care if it's 2 men or a handful of men, but in doing it in shifts, taking turns every time the church is open. And that is while all of the other people are in worshiping. These guys, some are in the parking lot out front, some are in the foyer, some are walking through the buildings, locking down doors that shouldn't be open, checking closets and empty rooms to make sure they're really empty, that nobody's hiding or doing anything improper, from illegitimate relationships that could go on in an empty room to somebody stealing something or messing with something. So, but again, just kind of securing the area while everybody else is worshiping, and you don't have to make a show of it. So any church can do that. Then on top of that, even most small churches can afford some kind of at least one video camera now hooked up to a computer. I mean, that's easy to do. Sometimes you can get 2 or 3 or 4 with no problem at all. Even small churches can do that. The other thing, check with your local police or sheriff's offices. Most of them will put a uniformed patrol officer in a marked car outside of your church for traffic control and general security, and they will do that very reasonably. And most small churches can afford a weekly fee for that if you will check with the sheriff's office. So those are some things. But now, as you get into larger congregations, Brother Carl, I tell churches, look, just go all out as much as you can. All right, my church, for example, it's not a mega church, but for our area, it's a very large church. We're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. We'll have 400, 500, 600 people there every Sunday morning. So it's a good-sized church. But what we do is we have a golf cart rover that goes all through our parking lot. We've got several guys that walk outside and continually checking the parking lot and the entrance areas. We've got rovers that are on the inside. None of these people are seen by the congregation. They're just moving through the halls, checking doors, locking down outside entrances, checking. They're hanging out in the foyer. Once the worship service gets started, they lock the front doors, and then we've got glass so we can see through. And if somebody comes, if we know them and, they don't look suspicious, it's not a guy in a trench coat wearing a backpack, for example, then we can open the door and let them in. But we secure the place. And of course, we have panic bars on our doors so the people inside, if it was a fire, they could get out even if the doors are locked. But people on the outside can't come in without somebody opening it for them. So we do that. We have video cameras throughout our church. We have somebody sitting in a video camera monitoring room watching everything that's going on the whole time our people are congregated there. We have panic alarms throughout the church. We have several other things that I don't want to give away our whole security system here over the radio that goes out to the world. But the other thing we do is we employ uniformed law enforcement officers, patrol officers with their patrol car, and they will park out front. And some of our parking is across the street from the church in a big parking lot, and a bunch of it's on the same side of the church. So we have people crossing in walkways. And so that patrol officer's out there with the lights on, and that's a big deterrent. Now, we can talk about should people be armed. I don't insist that people are armed in our church. That would require all kind of insurance things and training and all of that. But in Florida, we have the concealed weapons permit and right to carry laws. So a lot of people, men and women, can carry concealed, and they do. We tell people on our roving security teams, you're not required to have a gun. You're not a cop. You're not a cowboy. You're a set of eyes and ears. Take your cell phone with you. Put in some speed dial numbers so we can contact each other immediately. As I said, we have our panic lights and panic alarms that go off if the children's area is being messed with, if the youth area is being messed with. So we've got all of that in place. Now, I'm telling you, Brother Carl, to listen to me talk, you would think, oh my gosh, it sounds like a prison. But it really isn't. If you were to come, you and your daughter were to come worship with us, you would not have a clue. I mean, you would see the patrol car out front with the lights on, but a lot of churches do that. And he's just slowing traffic down so people can cross over the street, etc. But once you come to our church, you won't know who the security is. You won't know who's armed. While you're in church, you don't have a clue that people are walking all over the place outside and watching video cameras and watching every door and locking the doors down. You would just be in this awesome, sweet, powerful church and with hundreds and hundreds of people there fellowshipping and worshiping together. But it's one of the safest places on earth you can be on a Sunday morning on the Gulf Coast. Now, I want to say to your folks, Brother Carl, having all of this security in place does not mean that nothing bad will ever happen. We've been very blessed. We've not had an active shooter. Over the years, we have had people steal money, steal pocketbooks, break into the church. Over the 30 years, that's happened 3 or 4 times, so it hasn't happened much. We've had some domestic disturbance a few times where somebody from a family will come up to the church because they know their family members there, and they'll try to start something. But, of course, we've got security people that are right there that immediately usher them off the property. So it's an extremely safe place, but it doesn't mean nothing bad will happen or can happen. But I'll tell you what it means, Brother Carl. It means we're not sitting ducks in our church. It means we will not be slaughtered in our church. See, what happened in Sutherland, Texas, and my heart breaks for those people. I'm not judging them. I'm not trying to do Monday morning quarterbacking. I'm only going by what I've read and watched on the news. It took a next-door neighbor with a rifle to shoot this guy, and to eventually it killed him, and to stop this thing, to scare him, to get him off the property. I don't know if anybody in the church was armed. It doesn't sound like it. I don't know. Apparently they didn't have any rovers because he started shooting before he ever went in the church. He was shooting out in the front yard towards the church is what some reports were saying. So I can just say at our church that could happen. Somebody could come out of the parking lot and just start shooting. But he would be met by people outside that probably are armed and would shoot back. there's also a patrol officer there that would shoot back. If he made it inside, and I don't know how he could because the doors would be locked, but if he did, then we have people in the foyer area and wherever entrances are that could be opened. And so, and then if he got into the sanctuary, again, we've got people in there that are armed, including me. So, I'm telling churches and pastors, please, you have to take precautions. We're living in a different day. You don't have to be all militaristic and cowboy and don't act like you're a bunch of police officers. That'll get you in legal trouble. Just use your eyes, use your ears, communicate with each other, lock doors, watch video cameras, have a few people, and it's better if you have retired law enforcement or retired military. Let them carry concealed. So anyway, Brother Carl, there's so much we could talk about. I'm sure people have questions about turning the other cheek and, should we even worry about a gun in a church? But I'm just telling you, churches can be sitting ducks, and we are now living in an age where we're going to have to think, we're going to have to be smart, and we're going to have to be careful. I feel sorry for those states, Brother Carl, that still are encroaching upon our Second Amendment rights. There are a couple of states, for example, that it's against the law to have a gun in church unless the church approves it. Now, I live in Florida. In Florida, you can carry a gun in a church whether the church approves it or not. It has to be concealed. Nobody will know you have it unless you need it. But I'm telling your people, I don't know North Carolina. Maybe you can give me the law on that in just a moment, Brother Carl. But I would not take my family to a church where there was not some kind of security, even if it was just a couple of guys roving around checking on everything with some cell phones that could call the cops and call each other if something happened. I wouldn't take my family. I wouldn't take my family to a church where the elders or whoever, the deacons, the pastors, passed a rule that you couldn't have a firearm legally concealed in a church. I wouldn't take my family, because what you're saying is, as a pastor, as a shepherd of the flock that's supposed to keep the wolves off the sheep, what you're saying is, we don't care if your family dies here or not. It's just horrible, Brother Carl, to think about. But these are things that we have to think about in the day and age in which we live. Let me hush and see if you have any questions. I know people have a lot of questions about these things, and maybe you could take questions from your audience over the next few weeks, and I could come back on and answer them on the air or something, or however you might want to do it, because I know this is a sticky topic for a lot of people. But this latest shooting in the church is the worst in recorded U.S. history, or in U.S. history, because our history is recorded. So I'm just telling you, it should be a wake-up call for every church. I don't care if you're in the middle of nowhere with 20 people on a Sunday morning. You're a sitting duck if you don't have some kind of security. And even a little teeny church can have church security if they will just think. Brother Carl, does that make sense?
It does, and it resonates a lot with me. I'm sure that your remarks today are resonating with just about everybody. And I think the last 2 or 3 days I've heard more comment about this. I was talking to a lady about 2 days ago, and she was telling me that she carries a gun in her pocketbook every Sunday to church, and her church has got several people that have concealed weapons, and I think that's good. But I think this conversation is now going on in all the churches. I think this has kind of opened the eyes of everybody, but it sort of says something, and you kind of have answered some of the other questions I had, but what does this say about our society? Now, you touched on that. Gunman is this angry, and somebody this angry, and all this happening. What is this saying about our society? So I'll turn back over to you.
Well, brother, listen, we've always had evil people in our society because our world is filled with evil people, and short of people being born again and trying to live for the Lord, and short of the Lord returning, it's going to be that way. The problem is today, though, now we're living in the age of technology, instantaneous communication information systems. People can get on the internet and learn how to do all kind of evil. They can incorporate other people in their evil if they want. They can get on the internet like this guy was doing, this Kelly fella, and was just trashing and hating all over Facebook and hating Christians and hating churches. And listen, this is important. Now we know that this guy, that the church that he shot up was filled with his in-laws. apparently from a bad marriage before or some kind of a bad relationship. So see, that's the thing. I mean, any church could be susceptible to a family, some nut that goes crazy in a family dispute and comes down to the church because they know where the family is on a Sunday morning. I mean, so this is why every church has to take care. But yes, brother, it speaks to the general condition of our world and our culture. Like I said, this is not Andy of Mayberry anymore. Think, in the last 50 years, brother. I mean, television programming used to be Andy of Mayberry and Leave It to Beaver. I mean, but look what it is now. It's all manner of filth and sex and violence and cursing. It's just flowing with filth. And now we have the internet and all the sex and violence and filth and hatred in the last years of the Obama administration. And I'm not blaming Obama for this, but I'm just saying, you know, he was so divisive and racially divisive, and there's so much racial discord that's hanging over from that. Black Lives Matter, and the cops acted stupidly, and all of these kinds of things that have just flowed into our culture. For 100 years we've been teaching our children they come from monkeys and that there is no God. And now for decades we've been telling them you can't pray in school, you can't read your Bible in school, you can't witness in school, you can't invite people to your church. And I mean, all of this stuff. I mean, so why would we think that our culture would not suffer from these things? You know, massive rates of abortion. We don't know what a marriage is anymore. Supreme Court gay marriage ruling. I mean, the last president issued an order for children to be able to shower and use the bathroom together. Didn't matter what sex they were. I mean, it's just insane, Brother Carl. So our culture is going insane. And insane people like this Kelly fella are coming out of the woodworks, and they're wanting fame. They're wanting to be noticed. They're driven by demonic spirit, if you will. So, you know, I'm not trying to say the zombie apocalypse is upon us. I mean, you know, good old living in the USA still goes on pretty much every day, everywhere. But we just have to be careful, Brother Carl. And let me say to the women carrying guns in their pocketbooks, please understand, and I know they do. I'm not trying to talk down to them, but as a former law enforcement officer, let me just say this. You've got to be really careful if you carry a weapon, and particularly if it's not on your person, if it's in a pocketbook and a child can get into it, or if you forget and lay your pocketbook down, or you leave it in a restroom and a child or a person that doesn't need a gun gets a hold of it. You are criminally responsible for that gun. So I just say to women especially, please be careful with that. If you can't get a gun that somehow you can wear on your person, then if the law allows you to carry it in a pocketbook, you're going to have to keep that thing chained to your arm or something, and be careful. But I say to men as well who carry firearms, just because you have a firearm doesn't make you invincible. It doesn't make you a cop. It doesn't make you a military officer. It doesn't make you a fighting machine, and you are responsible criminally. If you pull it out when you're not supposed to, you could go to jail. If you shoot somebody that was not the criminal, even if it's an accident, you could be in all kind of trouble. It can change your life. Even shooting a bad guy. Listen, I've been shot at, and I've shot at people before as a deputy sheriff. It's not fun. It is horrific at times. I'm very blessed. I don't have PTSD, but here I am all these years later, and I can remember those situations very vividly. So this is not something to just say, well, I've got a gun, so everything's okay. No. Back in the Old West days, a lot of people died carrying guns. Just because you have a gun doesn't mean you're invincible. But it does mean that if a church has a good, logical security system in place, a reasonable, well thought out, you've got some good, responsible people that you can trust with firearms that don't act like cowboys, then you have a fighting chance. And more than likely, you will not be massacred by some idiot that walks in with a gun, Brother Carl.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to be going to Boston here in about 5 minutes with Jeff Kuna. He's a great friend of yours up there. So I got about 3 minutes here. I want you to kind of fill in for me. But You talked one time about satanic influences, and you've seen a lot of satanic influences. I think you've told me that there are more satanic influences today than you've ever seen before.
Yes, absolutely. And listen, satanic occultic influences have been around since the beginning of time, no doubt. But again, we're living in the age of internet and cell phones, instantaneous communication information systems, and transportation, high-speed transportation. People can get together quickly now. You know, we drive down an interstate highway 70, 80 miles an hour. I mean, 100 years ago, we were still riding horses and carriages and wagons. So yes, more than ever, the demonic has its own stage and its way of reaching massive populations, and this is what is happening. It's a prophetic sign of the times in which we're living, Brother Carl. Yes. And by the way, please say hello to Jeff Cooner for me. He is a dear friend.
Amen. Well, I think we've had a great broadcast today. I certainly plan to get in touch with you right away, and you and I have had a great relationship. And Pam.
The Satanists wanted to install their own tribute, a pagan idol, on the Capitol grounds, right next to the Ten Commandments.
Billions around the planet are witnessing a world in the grasp of sadistic spiritual darkness. This unholy alliance has infected our governments, our religious institutions, and our societies. The world appears to be unraveling. But can the evil behind these dark supernatural forces be defeated? Is everything playing out just as the Bible predicted it will in the final days? At last, you can know the answers to mankind's most urgent questions and learn your destiny among today's events in the new, unprecedented work taking the prophecy world by storm. Gods and Thrones, Nakash, Forgotten Prophecy and the Return of the Elohim by best-selling author, former decorated law enforcement officer, and senior pastor Carl Gallups. This changes everything. Available now wherever fine books are sold.